Welcome to Your Vote Counts, a candidate forum jointly sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk counties and Capital Community Television. I'm Bea Epperson, representing the League of Women Voters. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that works to educate its members and the public about governmental issues. On this program, we are hosting the candidates for the House of Representatives of Oregon, District 21. They are Brian Clem, Democrat, Marvin Sanis, Independent, and Dan Farrington, Republican. Following their opening statements, the candidates will be asked questions and we'll rotate their responses. We'll begin with 3-minute opening statements where the candidates will introduce themselves and discuss their priorities. The order was determined by a previous coin toss, and we'll start out with Marvin Sanis. The candidates were not given the questions in advance. Marvin Sanis, will you begin with your introduction and your top priorities?
Okay, I'm Marvin Sanis. I'm the independent candidate for House District 21. I grew up in Mount Angel, graduated from Portland State with a bachelor's degree in social sciences. I've raised 4 children, have 2 grandchildren, and I've been a small businessman in Salem for 45 years. I'm in this campaign as an independent because I like the priorities of the independent party. We have a philosophy of a big tent. We're a party of ideas rather than ideology. I'm in this campaign for the second time to raise awareness of this epidemic of addiction in our state. What I want to do is advocate for treatment for the 10, 11, 12-year-olds in the beginning of their addiction. We must make this culture shift from addiction as behavior to addiction as illness. If we can address this disease at its beginning, when these children are malleable, the parents of these kids need a medical option for this condition. I think if we could do this, make this culture shift from addiction as behavior to addiction as medical, we could close a prison in 10 or 15 years. The second thing that I'm passionate about is the economy of Oregon. 85% of Oregon's economy are businesses which do less than $300,000 a year. We have a vibrant small business community. If we encourage these people, not with tax incentives, but less regulation, less tax, we would have a vibrant recovery. You know, I have this example of we're doing a ductwork repair, and it's going to be about $1,000, and the contractor said, Marvin, for a $1,000 job, it is not worth the paperwork that we would have to do to get the tax breaks. The incentive for the small businessman is less regulation, not tax incentives, but less regulation. We have to do that in Oregon, and I think our recovery would happen overnight if we could make this regulatory, over-regulatory process less. And what I'd like to propose is that for every new regulation or tax imposed upon small business, we eliminate one tax or one regulation. The added benefit that would have is that we would have our legislatures would read the legislation. So, thank you very much.
Okay, Brian Clem, will you begin with your introduction and your top priorities?
Great, thanks. Thank you, Bea. And first of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters for doing the forum. It's very helpful for people to get to see candidates in action and not just, you know, our flyers and that kind of stuff. So I'm Brian Clem. I'm a 5th-generation Oregonian. I was born in Coos Bay and raised there. I went to Oregon State University, and that's where I really started getting involved in public service. We did some advocacy for Oregon State, and 1993 around higher education funding, particularly the ability for low-income Oregonians to go to college. The 95 session, I worked as a staff person. 97 and 99, I represented U.S. Senator Ron Wyden at the Oregon Capitol. And then from 2000 to 2006, I worked as the volunteer chair of the Oregon Student Assistance Commission, helping low-income Oregonians go to college and being down at the Capitol asking legislators to be more sympathetic to the plight of low-income Oregonians. I started my own business here in Salem in 2000. I've been running that for 12 years. I'm a computer repair guy. Many of you will know that because I fix your computers. And at some level in around late 2005, I got frustrated with the legislature and decided to run for office because I thought I could do a better job. My main priorities on an ongoing basis, not really just for this election, but they have been for the last 6 years, are trying to improve the job prospects, particularly for those in the middle class, because this country is in danger of losing our middle class at the moment. And it's not something that the state government can completely control. You know, whether there's a Greek euro issue or something going on in Asia, that's not inside of our control, but the state of Oregon procures $5 billion worth of goods a year. And until I authored a law this last year that passed unanimously in the House of Representatives, now law, called the Buy Oregon Act, the state would buy from whoever the cheapest bidder was. We didn't care where the goods or service came from. Now we give a preference for Oregon-made products to try and create jobs here so we can get back to making things in this country instead of just shipping our jobs overseas. So creating jobs, particularly by using the things that are within our control, like our procurement power, are priorities for me. Beyond that, trying to improve our education system. I voted against the education budget this last time because it was too deep a cuts. As you know, we lost all of our librarians. We've laid off 104 teachers this last budget cycle, and the projection by Salem Kaiser, there will be continued losses without reinvestment in education. Last but not least is something that's not something you vote on or don't vote on. It's how do you personally, when you're a legislator, foster a functioning, problem-solving, either bipartisan or nonpartisan body. And it's something I've been well known for, is speaking my mind, usually in these cases where they make the newspaper against my own party, for trying to have a functioning body that doesn't devolve into what you've seen in Washington, D.C. and states around the country where they just can't get business done because they're too partisan, and I don't want to be any part of that.
Dan Farrington, will you begin with your introduction and your top priorities?
Thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Dan Farrington. I'm a small business owner here in town. These are tough times and we have big challenges ahead of us. It's going to require hard work, common sense, and our community working together. I was born and raised in Newport, Oregon. My father owned his own business called Lincoln Ready Mix. And we learned a long time ago about hard work, work ethic, discipline, problem solving, accountability, but also giving back to our community. Which means is, as your next state representative, I would be actively involved in our community of helping job creation, cutting regulations, and cutting the red tape that gets in our way for us business owners to grow, but also encourage businesses to come to our state. But also education. We need to invest in our teachers and our students and get the vocational classes back into the classrooms. That's very important because in high school, kids are looking for opportunities and what's out there, and if we can bring those vocational classes back, that gives them a chance. But also we have natural resources that are very strong in our communities, and we need to look at our smaller communities like the timber industry. We need to allow them to cut timber and using water out of the Columbia for the winter times and for our farmers in the summer. So we need to look at that. So those are my main focuses. But also Oregon needs to be what I call open for business. We need to let people know in this country that Oregon wants you to come here and have our tax laws that they're reasonable and that we're open for business. In Marion County right now, our unemployment rate is at 9.4. Across the state, it's 8.9 average. That's unacceptable. We need to change that. We ought to change our environment. As a business leader in this community, I've created jobs. I've been involved in 2 different businesses, the Rock and Rogers restaurants and now Sunrise Medical Consultants. And each part is, Rock and Rogers I grew in 4 years from 6 employees to 53 employees. And then I went to Sunrise Medical and I had 1 employee and grew that to 21. Now I do business in Oregon, Washington with this staff. We need government to be partners with our community and our businesses. We need to work together. As a coach over the last 32 years, I've learned a lot about working as a team. And it's never been I need to work across the aisle, work with everybody involved and say, hey, what makes sense? Common sense. And that's my goal in this program, is to give kids opportunities, but also business opportunities, and have common sense and fairness in everything I do. Thank you.
We'll start with our questions now, and the order for the candidates for question 1 will be Brian Clem, Dan Farrington, and Marvin Sanis. And by the way, you folks have touched on many of my questions, so if it's a question you've really elaborated on already, maybe you can expand on that. So here is the first question. As Dan said, the unemployment rate in Oregon just increased to 8.9%. What should the legislature do to increase the number of good jobs in Oregon?
So first of all, the legislature doesn't create jobs. We could pass a bond measure and there would be some direct jobs created for a short time, but the legislature doesn't create jobs. People like us who all own businesses, invest our own money and time, that's who creates jobs. So the legislature isn't going to create any jobs. It can set the right climate though. So for example, I talked about Buy Oregon. The legislature can control its procurement. $5 billion of goods and services. Our former statute said buy it from whoever's cheapest, no matter where they're located. Now it says we can go within 10% of the low bid if they're an Oregon company. That has shifted already since it was signed into law and took effect in January. In the first quarter of 2012, $10 million worth of contracts from out of state to in-state. The state hospital, they switched from a French multinational conglomerate to Charlie's Grocers for $100,000 a month worth of food purchases. Charlie's buys from Oregon growers. I wrote that law. So on top of those kinds of procurement efforts, it's climate. I wrote a bill called Senate Bill 766. It creates a process for entities to supersite high-wage, high-job facilities outside the land use system. And I'm a supporter of the land use system, but sometimes you have an opportunity so unique, like Intel, that you have to act quickly. So we created a process to do that in sort of what we call the God Squad, where they can go in and create the opportunity for people. Last, if you go to the Saturday market, you'll know I passed a bill I wrote a law that deregulated the farmers market and made fees and regulations on small farmers far better for them. That's what the legislature can do to help with the job climate.
Dan, what should the legislature do to increase the number of good jobs in Oregon?
Well, I think in 2011, the Republicans did have a bill in the House that was going to create 50,000 jobs in our state, and 10,000 jobs were going to be timber. And we're having an abundance of timber in this state, and we need to utilize that. And we've shown that over the past years that we've been able to cut and re-harvest our timber. And I think there was 10,000 jobs right there. But also in the wintertime, the Columbia River, had a bill that would created 10,000 jobs of pulling water out of the Columbia. Washington and Idaho do the same thing, so why doesn't Oregon do that? And that way we can have water for our farmers. But those type of things, but I think it comes down to regulations and the red tape that causes businesses not allowing us to grow in this community and this state. And we need to change those. And we have a couple tax that we need to repeal, 66 and 67, and we need to repeal that and start getting businesses to come to Oregon instead of leaving.
Marvin Sanis, what should the legislature do to increase the number of good jobs in Oregon?
Well, the simple answer is to get out of the way. We do have a vibrant small business community in Oregon. You know, every time we talk about the economy, they talk about Hewlett-Packard or OSHU or the Port of Portland. These organizations are a tiny, tiny part of Oregon's economy. Small business people are what drives Oregon's economy. Those are the people we have to encourage. Now here's a silly example. We wanted to restore a 90-year-old drinking fountain and put it back into service, and we're doing it. But what we have to go through to get to, I thought we'd get it done in a few weeks. It's going to take over a year to get this drinking fountain back in the sidewalk and get it working again. It's probably going to cost $1,000. It's going to, the guy that's going to restore it is going to work on it for 3 or 4 days. It's just an example of an idea that a small businessman had, that the gravel that you have to go through. Most people, the small businessmen, have a good idea. They go, geez, I just don't want to start. Anyway, get out of the way. Thank you.
On question 2, our order will be Dan, Marvin, and Brian. The governor has just said that he will lead a tax reform effort in 2013. What specific tax reforms would you support if elected?
Well, I think it's very important that we get people back to work, and the tax revenue from what we get more people working is going to be enough to cover it. So I think tax reform is, let's peel it back and let's allow businesses to strive. Right now, people don't have confidence or trust in our government. So they're not going to invest in new business. They're not going to invest in new employees. People around the nation are not going to look at Oregon as a priority to come here. So if you're looking at tax reform, it's about get out of the way, cut the taxes, and make it more user-friendly for businesses to grow in Oregon. And I strongly agree with repealing 66 and 67, because I think a lot of people left this state and a lot of revenue left this state very quickly. And I think people recognize that around it. And I know there's a lot of companies that want to grow, and they're looking at other states to grow in. They're not going to grow in Oregon. They're going to go somewhere else. We need to restructure our tax structures of making it simplified and make it business friendly.
Marvin Sanis, what specific tax reforms would you support if elected?
I strongly support Kitzhaber's, the governor's leadership in tackling this issue. I think that we are willing to pay our share. We know that we have to support government. There are some things that government just must do. Education, if there's one thing we know is a good investment, it's education. We have to fund that. I think people are willing to fund those kind of things. But we keep naming a different tax collector. Let's tax the smoker. Let's tax the drinker. Let's tax the businessman. Let's tax, anybody but me. I think if we've got to find a way to spread the tax equitably. If we start with that word equity, taxing businesses is that's not the way to do it. You have to tax the person who's willing to pay, the individual. But anyway, 2 years ago I talked about a flat tax, and the resistance I got from that idea was overwhelming. And the resistance was because people wanted someone else to pay their tax. I think if we talk about equity, we're willing to shoulder the responsibility for taxes. I certainly am. Thank you.
Brian Clem, what specific tax reforms would you support if elected?
Great. Actually, I had lunch with the governor last Friday. We talked about his what's going on up at Mahonia Hall, so I think it's premature to know what would come out of there. So your question's a good one, which is what would I support, regardless of the outcome of those discussions. I will support the League of Oregon Cities proposals that they're making around returning local control to local communities for being able to vote for levies for their schools or their libraries without it falling under compression, we call it. That's something that local Republican mayors and city councilors were asking us for just a few days ago, the ability to, if the voters want to vote for a levy, not have it pinch the other services in the community, so I will support that. In terms of the broader things other than local property taxes, which is what I just referred to, I think it's important to create a real rainy day fund, and I think that particularly the corporate kicker, but even the personal kicker, are things that voters can be asked, would you consider giving up your kicker for a few years until we've created a real rainy day fund? In the end, it's up to the voters because it's in the Constitution. But I would support if somebody comes up with a package that says, we're going to reduce capital gains, we're going to create a rainy day fund, we're going to do these overall restructuring, it's likely I'll support it. I can tell you that it's important that for the person who wants to represent this district, you consider revenue, because our constituents, 70+% of them, work in state government. Measure 66 and 67 passed by double digits. Repealing those would lay off my constituents. It's not something I would support. Adjusting the business tax I could go for, not repealing the personal income tax on the wealthy.
Okay, we'll go with question 3, and the order will be Marvin Sanis, Brian Clem, and Dan Farrington. If elected, will you be advocating for particular educational reforms in the 2013 legislature? And please be specific.
Well, I'm passionate about education. I think it is the one certain thing that government does that it has an immediate return. To secure the funding for education, I don't know the ins and outs of how we finance it now. I know that my property taxes pay a portion. I know that the general fund pays a portion, but I will support any revenue measure that would encourage funding for education. It's the $1 I know that I'm going to get back as a taxpayer. Thank you.
Brian Clem, if elected, will you be advocating for particular educational reforms in the 2013 legislature?
Well, if you ever go Google Brian Clem 2011 education reforms, you'll see that I was the key vote switcher. I switched my vote on a bill that enabled the passage of the entire 2011 education reform package. And I voted with the Republicans in that case because, as I said in the beginning, I'm not interested in partisanship. I'm interested in problem solving and being constructive. So in 2013, for the most part, I would be focusing on implementation of those 11 bills. So we made monumental changes to the system already, and I don't want to shock the system with a dozen more reforms when we're already reconstituted their governance, made a new education czar, changed the superintendent from appointed to elected, opened up more virtual schools. So all that was done just recently. I would focus more, actually, like Marvin said, on funding, class size reduction, revenue restructuring, corrections reform, those kind of issues, and not try and shock our system with more reforms.
Okay, Dan Farrington, if elected, will you be advocating for specific educational reforms in the 2013 legislature?
Yes, my main concern is the vocational classes being cut out of the high schools, and I think that's a very valuable thing for our community and our state, because this is where some kids that don't look to go to college or really don't know where they want to go, I want to make sure that those vocational classes are brought back to the high schools and allow kids to find out what their interests are, but also allow them to be productive in our society. So that's an area very important to me. And again, investing in teachers. 3 of my children are teachers. And it's very important to raising the bar for our teachers, but also in the classroom for our kids. And I think a lot of these businesses are starting to do relationships with the schools and allow them to work as an intern or that type of thing to understand their business. Last night I was at the Evergreen awards thing for Creative Jobs Pack, and it was about, they've built a sheet metal schooling at their site in McMinnville, and allowing the McMinnville students to come over and take those classes, because that's what they need for their business of airplanes and that type of thing. So they brought in people to learn how to do that, but also engineers and that type of thing. So I'd be encouraging that type of atmosphere.
For question 4, our order will be Brian, Dan, and Marvin. Are there any of the initiative ballot measures that you strongly support or oppose, and why? Brian?
Yeah, there's some. The marijuana measures I don't support. The ones that the legislature sent out around making government functional during times of emergencies, I support. You know, there's too many for me to rattle them all off in a minute and a half. But let's talk for just a second about why we have these ballot measures. Part of the problem, or when the legislature is functioning and people are solving problems, then the people who go to gather initiative signatures don't have that much success, because people are happy that their legislature is working in a bipartisan, constructive, problem-solving manner. When they don't, we have ballot measures. And all through the 90s, we had a lot that did a lot of damage to our state. Dealing with the ones that are on the books, to me, are more important than passing new ballot measures and trying to have things like, for example, the gill netting initiative. That would have been very contentious, very divisive, lots of problems. I applaud the governor for stepping up and saying, I'm going to propose a solution that makes the ballot measure and that war between coastal communities and urban Oregon just divide us even further. So I would like to see the legislature get ahead of the curve on these kind of problems. The corporate kicker initiative is something that, again, as part of an overall revenue package, it's something that can be included in those discussions. You know, in principle, I support that concept absolutely. To the degree it damages the ability to have a conversation about overall tax shifting, you know, that's a concern. So if the legislature can get ahead of the curve on these things, we'd be better off so Oregonians aren't trying to figure out complex things on their ballots when the legislature was unable to complete its work to get ahead of the curve.
Okay, Dan Farrington, are there any of the initiative ballot measures you strongly support or oppose, and why?
Well, 79 is probably the big one with the real estate, and it's a yes for no transfer tax on you know, people buying homes. And if we look at the people that are just starting to buy their homes, they don't need another tax on top of that to purchase that home. They're already funding or saving enough money, whatever it takes to put it on the down payment, and then you put a transfer tax on it. I think that affects them a lot, especially, and also the elderly. If they're downsizing and they go to sell their house, they're going to have to pay a tax on that too. So it's really strong with that. I'm totally against the marijuana ballots. I just don't think that's the right direction. 84, that's a yes of getting rid of the death tax and that downsize that over the next 4 years. And also 85, you know, the corporate tax, I'm against that, no, because I think that could have been written a little bit differently and making sure that was for education stability and not into the big fund of education. I think that was that's where I would be. And those are about the only ones I'll talk about.
Okay.
Thanks.
Marvin Sanis, are there any of the initiative ballot measures you strongly support or oppose, and why?
Well, I'd like to talk about the marijuana initiative. I'm not sure whether I support that or don't support that. What I do like is the debate. Addiction is epidemic in our state. I think marijuana is an entry-level drug. I think tobacco is an entry-level drug. I think alcohol is an entry-level drug. But the forces that are coming together, you know, they want to make money off of marijuana. It's, you know, we tax the smokers, we make money off the, you know, this lottery thing we do in Oregon. There's so much money in it now that it's beyond hope. And I'm afraid the same thing is going to happen with the state goes into the business of marijuana production. You know, if it was part of the medical community, you know, I think people who are suffering from terminal illness, if they find it of a help to them, it should certainly be available to those people and their medical people. But to get this thing involved in a revenue-generating thing, I don't like that at all.
Okay, we'll ask our last and final question, and the order is Dan, Marvin, and Brian. What other issues are you most passionate about that you want the legislature to address? Dan?
Well, I'm very passionate about jobs in our economy. I'm very concerned about it, and we need to make sure that, again, I come back to regulations and red tape for these businesses to grow. Again, that's going to be the corner, and if that's not our top priority coming in 2013, I don't know what can be. I think all the other ones will fall into place, but the most important is jobs. We need to get people back working. People are going to feel better about themselves. The medical bills are going to go, I mean, the mental state of us are going to be better. It's very rewarding to have a job and get a paycheck. And and getting people back to work, but good paying jobs that they can support their families. I've been very fortunate with my business. I've been able to educate all 6 of my kids going to college over the years. And again, that's an opportunity that I had because I worked and had a job. I want everybody in our community to have that opportunity. And all these kids in this in our high schools need that opportunity. So we need to create jobs for parents so they can feel good about who they are and what they're doing and provide for their families. Thank you.
Okay, Marvin Sanis. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
What other issues are you most passionate about that you want the legislature to address?
Well, besides this issue of attacking addiction at the beginning for the 10, 11, and 12-year-olds, treatment on demand for those parents need a medical option. We've got to do something about this this horrible thing we're doing in our correction system. You know, this concept of crime time, it's a 19th century philosophy. Punishment for, you know, what we're doing now is we're releasing people that should never be released. We have the science now to identify these people that are hopelessly criminal. We're putting people in jail that should never be put in jail. We're creating criminals. 70% of the people that are in our correction system are identified with an addiction illness. We could make abstinence a condition of freedom. We could have treatment. We only offer treatment in 6 of the 14 institutions in our state. Salem has five prisons. It's something that we must address in Salem, and the legislature is the only place to start with this, making this culture shift from addiction as behavior to addiction as medical. It is an illness, and we've got to start addressing it as illness. Thank you.
Okay, Brian Clem, what other issues are you most passionate about that you want the legislature to address?
It's really easy for me to get passionate because I have a 4-year-old daughter who is going to live in this state her whole life. And I wake up every day, regardless of whether I'm in the legislature or not, and worry about economic opportunity for people like her. Is she going to have a class size that's got 35 kindergartners and be herded like sheep around the room where the teacher's doing their best just to have them pay attention? Is she going to have the opportunity like I did to go to college and get some assistance, do work study, take out loans, and have it be a reasonable debt level? Is she going to be able to do what I did and start my own business? I operate internationally and in Salem, Oregon. I don't know that those things are right now on the American dream is still the same it was 20 years ago. So every day I wake up, whether in the legislature or not, it's what can I do to help rebuild the middle class in this country? It starts with stopping sending our jobs overseas. That's the very first thing. So buying local, supporting businesses here in Oregon, making sure that they have what they need to be able to do business here in Oregon and not leave and go make it in China or India or Vietnam is important. Selling there is great. Sending the jobs there is not great. I'm the chairman in the Oregon legislature of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, continuing to promote the use of timber and support for programs like Farm to School that bring more Oregon goods into the classroom, that helps farmers have guaranteed income, are all things that lead to economic opportunity for our natural resource industries. Continuing to grow our small entrepreneurs into bigger businesses, rather than exclusively trying to recruit out-of-state entities here, is another piece to bringing stability to our economy.
Okay, the candidates will now have 1.5 minutes for a closing statement, and we'll go with Marvin Sanis, then Brian Clem, then Dan Farrington. Marvin?
Well, I hope I can do this in 1.5 minutes. I'll return to this issue. 11 years ago, I lost a son, Eric, 20. He committed suicide, and part of his problem was drugs and alcohol. His mother and I knew he had a problem when he was 12. Lois and I went to Tough Love for 3 years every week, and we talked about consequences, accountability, raising the bottom. We did not talk about, nor was the issue ever raised, that your child has an illness. Your child has a medical condition. I want us to provide that for the parents. I've got a 3.5-year-old. He'll be 4 in November, and I'm worried you know, 7 or 8, 10 more years. Brian's 4-year-old daughter, I'm worried about her. I want Brian to have a medical option in the case that his daughter has addictive disease. So that is my primary issue. We've got to address it in the correction system and in our schools and with our children. Thank you.
Okay, Brian, Clem, your closing statement.
Great. When you're considering whether to rehire me for this job, I think you ought to think about 2 things. Do I share your values, and do I have the experience necessary to continue to be effective? You know, I'm not interested in a government that is spending its time in your bedroom or in your small business. Those are things that Oregonians are libertarian essentially in nature, and they're not interested in people spending you know, their political capital deciding whether or not a woman has a right to choose a safe and legal abortion. And when you get into the experience, as I mentioned, I have 20 years of experience in the Oregon legislature, 6 as a legislator. That's how I got all these laws that I just talked about for the last 20 minutes passed. I have great relationships across the aisle. I have a great working knowledge of the Capitol. And it's how the Buy Oregon Act became law. It's how the preservation of the Metolius became law. It's how the Farm to School Act became law. It's because I know what I'm doing. So I would ask that you consider experience and who shares your values, and I would appreciate your support again in 2012. Thank you.
Dan Farrington, your closing statement.
Yeah. Well, I'm asking for your vote in this race. I'm someone that would like to be a part of that group or that team that gets Oregon back working again, gets our regulations and our red tape take out of the way, and get business owners growing again, get people working in our communities working again. And I've been a coach for 32 years, as I stated before. I'll use those coaching skills, that leadership skill, that business leadership skill, but also my experience of raising 6 children in this community, going through education. I had 6 children, 1 at the IB level and 1 was on an IEP with being mildly autistic. I know the education process. I know the struggles that parents go through in the education, and especially for the younger ones. I know that, and I've had that experience. But also being a business leader, knowing how to create jobs in this community, how to work together with people and get them motivated to be successful. But also bringing back trust into the government and honesty and telling it like it is and give people a good climate to work in. And finally, I promise to be someone that's fair and use common sense, but also true to his word that my children will be proud of who their father is, and my wife will be proud of me too. Thank you very much, and I look forward to meeting you later. Thank you.
Okay. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk counties, I want to thank each of you gentlemen for being here today and expressing your views on what you stand for if you were elected to the legislature. Thank you for CCTV providing this opportunity for you to watch the candidates, and also for you, the viewing public, to participate in your own citizenship. Ballots are mailed October 18th, and you must mail your ballot back so that it's received by county election officials on or before Tuesday, November 6th at 8 p.m. So it's important that you remember to vote, because your vote counts.